Okay, welcome to our last session where we should be measuring on the intellectual and the behavioral aspect of the brain. So we know that there are possibly a lot of some psychological explanation. So even though we have a lot of psychological explanation, we still have minimal biological or physiological explanations that can account to people's intellectual and behavior at large. So our first session majorly with the intellectual, and then the later one will focus on the behavioral aspect. So anytime you hear of the intellectual aspect of the brain, it is highly likely that you are thinking of the cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is able to execute this. This is because they have various types of cells that are normally arranged in layers. So if you are able to remember the cerebral cortex, remember it was the superficial or maybe the external area that was majorly surrounding the subcortical areas. So where you could be having maybe the basal ganglia beneath, on top you'll be anticipating some cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex normally have 6 layers, some might say 7. As you are able to see over here, we have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, layer 6A, and layer 6B. So we anticipate some various types of cells within these layers. These cells are able to execute some specific role, as we'll be able to see. But most importantly, they should be able to assist in connecting the various parts of the brain. For example, in our part 1, or in the first layer, we should be having, these are normally referred to as the molecular layers, molecular layer. Layer 2, we have what we call the external granular layer. 3, we have what we call the layer of the pyramidal cells. So we have the pyramidal cells. So remember, we were talking about the pyramidal tracts. So most of the time, they are likely to originate from these extrapyramidal cells. Layer 4, we have internal granular layer. Layer 5, we have the large pyramidal cells. So large compared to these other pyramidal cells on the layer 3. It is from this area that we expect some, of course, some cell body to be able to sprout out descending axon that will be part and parcel of the corticospinal tract. Layer 6, we have the layer of fusiform or polymorph layers. So layers of fusiform or polymorph cells. So we'll be able to see the specific role of this. But what you just need to know is that when you talk of the cerebral cortex, just remember this is a part of the brain where cells are normally arranged in layers. So that we have up to around 6 layers in the cerebral cortex. So the neuronal surface of the cerebral cortex with the successive layers of different types of neurons. So we have 3 major types of neurons that we anticipate. The granular, also called the stellate. This is because of their shape. We also have the fusiform, and we have the pyramidal. So remember the pyramidal cells, or maybe the pyramidal tracts. They are normally named pyramidal tracts. This is because they originate from the pyramidal area of the cerebral cortex, and their shapes are likely to be or of a pyramidal in shape. So something like this, and then sprouting out a descending axons. So remember, in the spinal cord, we are able to talk of some interneuron. So if you translate that to the cerebral cortex, the granular cells or the granular neurons can be equated to the interneurons. This means that the granular cells or the granular neurons should be acting as connector. So connection is really is very important in this area of the cerebral cortex. Remember, we suggested that you want the primary area of the motor or sometimes the premotor area or any area of the cortex to have some form of communication. So this communication is likely joining adjacent area of the cerebral cortex by the existence of these interneurons. So the interneurons majorly within the cerebral cortex are referred to as the granular neurons. So what you need to know with the nature of the interneurons, as we suggested still in the spinal cord, we can have some interneurons playing an excitatory role while other playing an inhibitory role. Whereas in the inhibitory neurotransmitter that we covered in the spinal cord was majorly glycine. But in this context, in the cortex, cerebral cortex, the inhibitory neurotransmitter that is likely to be released by these interneurons or the granular cells are the gamma aminobutyric acid. And we are able to see the very important role of the gamma aminobutyric acid. And we suggested that when the brain receives a sensory impulse from the brain, not every sensory impulse is worth responding to. So the brain might inhibit itself from responding, and that you anticipate by these granular cells to release some GABA neurotransmitter to be able to at least tell it to slow down on that particular response. But there are some that might require a response. If we are dealing with the sensory impulses that might require a response from the motor area, the type of granular neurons or the interneurons to be employed are likely to release excitatory neurotransmitter at their end, and the major excitatory neurotransmitter are the glutamate. So the sensory areas of the cortex, as well as the association areas between the sensory and the motor areas, have large concentration of these granule cells. So remember, these are the interneurons. They somehow work as a connector. Different regions of the brains need to be connected. A good example is a comparison between the motor and the sensory area. And we also know within the motor, we have various parts of the motor that forms the association area. In between the primary and the premotor area, we also expect these granules to be there. But we are told that majority of these cells are likely to be available between the sensory and the motor area, suggesting their important role in the connection part or maybe the association. That is with the granular. We suggested we have the pyramidal and the fusiform. So these cells are likely to give rise to almost all the output fiber from the cortex. So while the granular is playing the role of connecting, so this will be sprouting out fibers. And by now we know that a lot of fibers that relates to motor all the way to the spinal cord are likely to emanate from the pyramidal cells, specifically at the layer 5, where you expect now the large pyramidal cells. The pyramidal cells are larger and more numerous than fusiform. They are the source of the long nerve fibers that go all the way to the spinal cord. Our good example was the corticospinal. Neurons in the cortex run in two major ways. We have the horizontal and we have the vertical. So this is that is just by demonstration of what we've suggested. So if you consider this as your cerebral cortex, we've suggested we have three major types of cells: the pyramidal, the fusiform, and the granular. So where you have the granular, so remember the granular can either be external or internal. They actually play an important role in connecting various parts of the cerebral cortex, where you suggest that you can have a motor area maybe at this area, a sensory area, and different parts of the cerebral cortex. So for us to have this kind of connection, we actually require the granula that can connect both externally or internally. So these kind of connections represent are an horizontal projection. So these neurons are projecting their axon horizontally. The main reason is for them to form the association or the communication. So one of the communications that you anticipate majorly or with a commissural tract, remember something like the corpus callosum. We have those that have vertical projection, and by far we've suggested these are the pyramidal cells and the fusiform. So majority of the cerebral cortex are likely to have the pyramidal cells. So both at layer 3 and layer 5. So they are able to sprout out their neurons all the way down to the spinal cord. We'll also be able to see that some fusiform or some pyramidal cells might need to pass through some other areas where we suggested those tracts can be referred to as the extrapyramidal tracts. Some of these areas include the basal nuclei or the basal ganglia, as we saw in our motor control. The most incoming specific sensory signals from the body normally terminate at the layer 6, where you expect to have some fusiform. So fusiform also act as a kind of this not fusiform, but rather some granular cells that we expected in the layer 4, the internal granular. So we expect this to be majorly in the sensory areas, mostly at the internal. They are able to receive the signals, and after receiving the signal, they are able to send it in various areas of the brain. So most of the output signals leave the cerebral cortex through the neurons located in layer 5 and 6. The reason is because we have the not the extrapyramidal, but rather the large pyramidal and the fusiform cells that are likely to get their impulse from there. The very large fibers to the brain stem cord arises generally in layer 5, and the tremendous numbers of the fibers to the thalamus arises in the layer 6. So you are likely to say that the fusiform neurons might project their axons all the way to the thalamus as we seek to get into the extrapyramidal space, where maybe now after the thalamus you can decide to go to some other areas such as the cerebellum, just in attempt to make some important communications, either intellectual or some motor communication, as we are able to see. The molecular, that is the external granular 2, and the 3, the small pyramidal, perform most of the intracortical association function, with especially large number of neurons in the layer 1, in the layer 2 and 3, making short horizontal connection with adjacent cortical areas. So all these things, we suggested that by the time our cerebral cortex is receiving information, most of the impulses are likely to pass through the thalamus. So that means that if you charge the cerebral cortex with intellectual function, you cannot exempt the thalamus. And as you'll be able to see that thalamus has various nuclei that specifically directly map onto some specific area of the cerebral cortex, where you can be expecting some bidirectional movement of impulses. So the thalamus. This is positioned between the brainstem and the telencephalon. The diencephalon is composed of the thalamus, epithalamus, subthalamus, and the hypothalamus. The thalamus serves as a relay station for the ascending input to the cortex and receive information from each of the cardinal senses. apart from the olfactory, where it can bypass the thalamus. It is suggested that the thalamus serves as a gating function in filtering information. The thalamus consists of the multiple nuclei, as you are able to see. The role of the thalamus is also crucial in integrative hub for functional brain networks. The thalamus is connected with distributed cortical regions, integrating multimodal information across diverse cortical function networks. This connectivity supports various cognitive functions, including attention, memory, and information processing. So what you should just be able to get is that as a brain, you are likely to get a lot of information, a lot of sensation. But remember, all this sensation normally passes through the thalamus. So the thalamus is playing a filtration role, even though not as massive. We'll be able to see where a lot of filtration normally happens when it comes to maybe memory that could be part and parcel of the intellect. But it is hypothesized that this should be functioning as a gate where it should be able to filter some information. Filtering of the information. This is because when you, if you are to analyze maybe the memory of an individual, they'll not be having, they'll not be remembering every sensation that that they felt, because of some possibility that it is not every information that was able to get into the cerebral cortex. And remember, everything that get into the cerebral cortex, not everything, but some things, it can be able to increase maybe somebody's awareness or more appropriate attention. So if you are having an impulse at the periphery, it will get through some neuronal tracts, fibers and tracts, eventually into the thalamus. It is until it reaches the cerebral cortex that you are able to be aware, or you are able to direct your attention to the specific stimuli. So that means the thalamus has some form of limitation in terms of deciding which signals passes through the thalamus or reaches the cerebral cortex, and which signals do not reach the cerebral cortex. So, for example, if the thalamus filters off some particular impulse, it means that if that impulse just stagnates at this point, the cerebral cortex might not be aware of that particular impulse. And remember, if you are not aware, or if you are not attentive to a particular stimuli, there is no way you are going to store that impulse as an information for you to be able to remember later. So as we are exploring the intelligence, let's just remember one thing. We want information to reach the cerebral cortex. After reaching the cerebral cortex, this information, we want them to be stored. So we'll be able to see some of the other dynamics within the cerebral cortex and the other neighboring areas that determines whether information is stored or not, or whether it is stored temporarily or it is stored in the long term. So all these are very important. The one thing that we are discovering is that is the role of thalamus, in that thalamus allow various sensory impulses to pass through it and then direct them to a specific area of the cerebral cortex. So in this image represents the image of the thalamus. You are able to see the various nuclei. So you can say that thalamus, yes, is a subcortical structure that contains various nuclei. And these nuclei are serving a specific role. You'll be able to see there's a nuclei that allows for visual informations, tactile information to be able to pass through. So if you focus on the various parts of the thalamus, so the various parts of the thalamus have a direct translation to specific part of the cerebral cortex. So for example, you are able to see This is a representation of the cerebral cortex, meaning that at various regions of the cerebral cortex, they have a direct connection between the thalamus and the cerebral cortex. A good example is the lateral geniculate body. So a lateral geniculate body, it is expected to receive an information. So this is an occipital area, specifically charged with the visual sensation, appraising the sensation of the visual. So it means that it is normally supplied with the lateral geniculate body of the thalamus. So that means if you are having a problem within the thalamus, you might not be able to get some visual information. And when it comes to intelligence, you'll be able to see that some of the important domains within the intelligence also have some visual aspect. So that is maybe in terms of words, because sometimes you need to read. If you have a problem, all that might be limited or might be depressed to an extent. And not only the vision, you are also able to see maybe we have the mediogeniculate body that represent a part of the thalamus, likely to terminate at this area, mostly the wernicke's, that we know should be able to control the language of an individual, which relates to the auditory part. You can see the way it is anatomically positioned in a convenient way to be able to receive much of the auditory, and should also be able to have some visual appraisal in it. So you'll be able to see. For now, just think of the thalamus as a gate that allows sensation to get into the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex, once they have this information, they'll be aware of it. And after being aware of it, this information, when stored, it becomes memory. So you get information, and then the cerebral cortex see what to do with it. And of course, it will not do that independently. It is likely to involve some other subcortical structures that we are just about to examine. So this is a reminder of what we suggested. You've been able to see the various nucleus of the thalamus, where they are sending specific fibers to specific region of the cerebral cortex. And then in anticipation, the cerebral cortex can also be able to send the specific information back to the thalamus, so that we have a bidirectional way of communication. So when we talk of the functional area of the cerebral cortex, remember what we suggested: the motor area, the sensory area, and the various sensory area, where you can have the visual, the auditory, and the various part of the sensation. For the motor area, specific motor areas, maybe for the speech, where it could be the Broca's areas, or the specific motor areas that support specific area of the body. So all that is mapped within the cerebral cortex. So let's examine the cerebral cortex a little bit. So some of these functions as determined from the electrical stimulation of the cortex in a awake patient or during neurological examination, patient after the portion of the cortex were removed. The electrically stimulated patient told their thoughts evoked by the stimulation, and sometimes they experience movement. So it is kind of weird to examine how these functional areas were discovered. So for example, you're able to see the different functional area of the cerebral cortex, area charged with the somatosensory area, the voluntary motor area. Remember, that is the primary motor area. We can have some specific motor area functional that controls the movement of the eye, control the movement of the speech. So all these were discovered after maybe examining individuals who did not have maybe a specific part. For example, if you examine an individual who is having a lesion on the somatosensory area, neurologically, these individuals are likely to have some deficits in terms of somatosensory sensation. So they are not able to feel touch. They are not able to feel maybe some vibration in the various area of the body as represented by the somatosensory homologues. So the same will be true to the primary motor area, Broca's area, the Wernicke's, and every other area. It is through that that you are able to we've been able to suggest the specific functional areas of the cerebral cortex. So this is just the same emphasis where you are able to see the primary motor, the primary somatic or the somatosensory area that are charged with the specific or different role. So just remember, we not only have the motor and the sensory area, we also have some association area. Association area are very important in that they allow information to be integrated. So if you're having an association area at this particular spot, a good example here, let's say, for example, with the parieto-occipital temporal association, it is able to integrate some visual aspects, some somatosensory, and also some auditory aspect, so that by the time we are having a communication from this particular space, it will be rich in all those aspects. So large areas of the cerebral cortex that do not fit into the rigid category of the primary and the secondary motor area or the sensory are normally referred to as the association area, where they receive and analyze signals simultaneously from multiple regions of the both motor and the sensory cortex, as well as the subcortical structures. So important association area include the parieto-occipital-temporal association area. So you are able to see that in our previous image. We have the prefrontal association area, So this will be an important area, more so now that we are talking about the intellectual aspect of the brain. And we also have the limbic association area, sometimes referred to as the limbic cortex, somehow encapsulating some subcortical structure within the limbic system, which could be things like the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. So we'll be able to see that. So when you talk of the intellectual part, mostly we are respecting the prefrontal association area, and of course some area within the hippocampus. Hippocampus normally plays a major role, especially you cannot, this is because you cannot just talk of intelligence and ignore the memory aspect. So a good example where you are able to see some of the association area, like we've suggested. For example, the limbic system or the limbic cortex, you are able to see some of the specific roles that we anticipate. They'll be able to control some aspect of the behavior, emotions, and motivation. We have another association area, Wernicke's area. That Wernicke's area is able to take much of the information from the auditory and also receive some of the information from the vision. So we should be having another association area not appearing in this. Should be somehow the angular area. So the angular, which is able again to supply the Wernicke's. So sometimes functioning as a unit. This unit can be very important for the language comprehension. So remember, when you say somebody's intelligence, you cannot say they are intelligent and ignore the language part of it, because you are intelligent based on how you are able to communicate and how you are able to comprehend things. And remember, things within the world are normally coded in a language form. You have your emotions, but at the end of the day, how can you express your emotion in a very intelligent way without necessarily acting them out? It is through the language. You can tell us how you are feeling, or you can acknowledge how an individual is feeling by having a description part of it. So all these aspects, they'll be very important in the intelligent. And of course, the broker area is very important. This is because you could be intelligent by acknowledging each and everything that is going on, maybe within the environment, that could be internal within you, or maybe external in the environment where you are in. But at the end of the day, we'll be able to judge you by how you are communicating the experience that you are feeling back to us. And this is mostly charged by the brokers area. So the brokers area is a part of the motor, specifically controlling how you should be able to be forming speech. So this means controlling the areas of your lips and also the vocal cords and also the tongues that assists in the formation of the words. All these aspects are what can be summarized sometimes as intelligent. And of course, remembering the prefrontal cortex that should be able to assist in the planning of complex movement and elaboration of thoughts that individual can have, and will be able to see thoughts before you try to elaborate on your thoughts, or you try to think through sensory impulse that you just received. You need to have some temporary holding of that information, and we'll be able to see that as the maybe the working memory. So all these are still emphasizing the very important area. The prefrontal cortex, we are able to see it is with the elaboration of the thoughts and planning. The Broca's area for the speech, Wernicke's areas for language comprehension, and you are able to see Wernicke's area, it is an associatory area because it is receiving information from the auditory part. Remember the temporal region, where can be referred to as the auditory cortex functionally, supplying or have some fiber connection to the Wernicke's area, the primary visual the same, supplying this, and also the somatosensory area supplying the Wernicke's. So by the time Wernicke's is having an impulse, it is reaching impulse in regard to some somatosensory area, visual aspect, and auditory aspect. So remember, when we suggest that this area is good in terms of language, language can be auditory. By now we are talking in terms of words. Because you're having a good auditory cortex within your brain, you are able to hear what I'm saying. That is in terms of language. So that is in terms of sound. And remember, we are also having some words over here in terms of vision, the primary, the somatic, motor. You are able to comprehend that because you are having impulses reaching your primary visual area, and again taking all this information to the Wernicke's. So having some visual supply. And of course, sometimes you can also be having some somatosensory area, not specifically in terms of language, but they can also be important. Consider those who are using sometimes the braille. Even though, well, the brain, they are able to use their hands to be able to translate whatever they are feeling to form part of their language. So remember, everything that you are saying can be written, can be audio recorded, and can be coded in form of braille, and all this can be processed by the Wernicke's areas. So still exploring the most important part of the intellect, we've suggested the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex, we've suggested the prefrontal cortex. some subcortical structures such as the thalamus, because we are receiving information in filtration, the thalamus is serving that specific role. Now, a specific area within the cerebral cortex is the Wernicke's area. Remember, Wernicke's area we've suggested is very important for language comprehension. You are only able to comprehend a language if you are able to hear the words, if you are able to see the words, or if you are able to feel the words. All these can be integrated within the Wernicke's area. So maybe some of the things that you should be able to know within the Wernicke's area is Wernicke area, if you compare, because we know we have two cerebral hemisphere, and it is obvious that we have Wernicke's in the right and also in the left part. So remember, most people in the population are likely to be right-handed. So that means the dominant part of their brain is normally on the left. So this is also true to the to Wernicke's, in that if you compare the right and the cerebral hemisphere, the Wernicke's area is likely to be highly developed in one area and underdeveloped in the other area. So that means if you are right-handed, it is likely that much of your Wernicke's development is from the left side. So it follows just the rule of dominancy. So especially highly developed in the dominant side of the brain, the left side is almost all right-handed people, and we'll have the vice versa as it comes to the left-handed people. We've suggested that this plays the greatest single role of any part of the cerebral cortex for the higher compression of the level of brain functions that we call the intelligence. Remember, intelligence, unfortunately or fortunately, is something that can be expressed in form of language. So remember, language can be verbal and it can be non-verbal. You need to remember that. So this region has been called by different name, suggestive of an area that has almost global importance. So it can be referred to as the interpretive area, the gnostic area sometimes, the knowing areas, the tertiary association area, and so forth. So there are many names. So these are some of the names that are referring to Wernicke's area. But the standard name Wernicke's is named after the neurologist who was able to appreciate the significance of this area in the intellectual processes. You can emphasize the importance of the Wernicke's area, especially if you have an individual whose area of the Wernicke is damaged. And one of the things that are likely to damage the Wernicke's area is the chronic and excessive consumption of alcohol, where you can have the Korsakoff-Wernicke's disease. So after severe damage in the Wernicke's area, a person might hear perfectly well and even recognize words, but still unable to arrange these words into coherent thought. So I want you to notice one thing. So think of this as Wernicke's area. We suggested that Wernicke's is supplied by the auditory aspect, so by hearing, and it can also be supplied by the visual aspect, just by seeing. So you might be able to see words. So by virtue that you are able to recognize words, that means you are seeing, and your visual cortex, it is able to appraise those words. So you are able to see these words. By virtue that you are hearing what I'm saying, it means that your ears are okay, and your auditory cortex at the temporal lobe, it is also okay. But at the end of the day, what happens? The Wernicke's has the ability to take these words in audio form, to take this word in visual form, and to be able to code it in a way that makes sense. So that you code these words so that you translate them into thoughts. This is obvious. A good example will be, I don't know if there's anybody of you who understands Chinese, but if the Chinese guy speaks, you are able to hear what they are saying. You are able to see what they are writing, but you are not able to code that particular area, that particular information. Not because your NICS is not functioning, but it is because of some issue revolving around familiarity. This is because we know that Wanike's doesn't develop over time. The coding process of words into thought, it is normally not a slow process per se, but it is normally a process that takes time to develop. You know that when you are a child, you are not able to comprehend words. You are able to hear what people are saying and possibly see these words, but you are not able to make a meaning out of these words. So, but you are able to do that over time. So with the time, you are able to understand either English, Kiswahili, or your mother tongue. But with the time, these coding processes normally take some time. And this is based on the language familiarity. So whereby if you are not able to interpret Chinese both verbally or through vision, that means that does not mean your Wanike area is not function, but it suggests that you might need to take some time to learn how to code these particular words into thoughts. But in some individuals who have some problem at the Wanike area, they are not even able to code the language that they are normally familiar with, or the words that they are normally familiar with. So they'll just be able to see some words. They can be able to read a letter loudly, but they won't be able to understand what that letter is saying. By the time you're understanding what these words are suggesting in terms of hearing and maybe seeing, it is simply because your Wanike area has been able to code those words into a reasonable thoughts. Because remember, this external person, possibly a teacher, is using our words to communicate. What do they want to communicate? They want to communicate thoughts within their head. So remember, if you are not able to communicate thoughts, we'll be able to doubt your intelligence, not because the thoughts are not there, but because we also have to have a mechanism of expressing them. Most of the time in a civilized society, through speaking, and you can also use sign language, but if you are poor in those, you can just act them out. So that represents the communication of thoughts. But remember, before you communicate your thoughts, you'll just code them into words, like writing. When I say write, you know the thought of writing, what I want to communicate in words, and then the individual should also have the ability to code them back. So essentially what you are communicating, we are communicating thoughts, but you know we are not telepathic. I cannot know what you are thinking unless you express them. So you express them in terms of words, and I can have the capability to understand them if my Wanike area is good, because my Wanike area has the ability to decode that information. So we are suggesting that these words are just codes. So the Wanikes are able to break down that code to make a meaning out of it. Very important. So likewise, the person may be able to read words from the printed page, but unable to recognize the thoughts that is conveyed. This happens if the Wanike area is damaged. The angular gyrus, the interpretation of visual information. This is the most inferior portion of the posterior parietal lobe, as we are able to suggest, lying immediately behind the Wanike's area. So this is important in relaying some visual information. So that means if this is the Wanike's, we expect an angular gyrus to be around here. So whereby it will be taking some, it will be able to process some visual information, mostly maybe in terms of words. We'll be able to see that it is not only words, there are some specific areas that are charged maybe with structures. So maybe you understand words perfectly, but you don't understand an image. If I show you an image of a cup, maybe in terms of writing, you are not able to comprehend that. This is because there should be some specific areas that are charged with that particular role. So if this region is destroyed, while the Wernicke's areas in the temporal lobe is intact, it means that you might be able to understand only verbal language or verbal words and not the written form. So a good example will be maybe an individual who is having this disease. So this disease in the society, most of people are likely to say that huyu mtu hajui kusoma. So it could be their angular gyrus are not well developed, or there's a disease process that does not make sense of what they are saying in terms of words. So if it is only the angular region that is affected, this individual might be able to comprehend words by way of hearing, and they can be able to understand what you are suggesting. But if you give them a written information, they'll not be able to understand, because we are having some opaque or maybe some occlusion at the angular region. So this is just to understand the important area of this. And remember, in internal medicine, all this could be very important, especially when looking into some specific lesions, or maybe strokes. So remember, strokes can also just affect specific areas of the brain, whereby sometimes their symptoms might be obvious when they are having some intellectual deficit, such as this. You are meeting an individual who maybe was well educated, they were intelligent, and maybe now their concern is that they are not able to understand whatever they are reading. Anything, unless these people have some form of auditory feeding with the information. So these are some of the symptoms that some specific types of the stroke patient might present with. So still clinically, we are told that if the angular areas or the angular gyrus become diseased, the person can still interpret some auditory experience as usual, but they'll be having a limitation at their visual capability because of the blocked angular region. In as much as their visual cortex could be very okay, they are seeing things, but if the angular gyrus has an issue, we will not be able to feed that information to the Wernicke's, and therefore you'll be having some clinical problem. A good example or a good wording could be something like dyslexia or word blindness. So remember, word blindness does not mean that you are not seeing the word. You could be seeing the word, but you can't know what it's saying. So if somebody gives you an instruction in a written form, you won't be able to comprehend. You'll just be guessing around. But maybe sometimes adaptively, maybe what you can do while maybe seeing if you're having this particular disease, maybe what you can advise the patient or somebody, these are the words that have been given. So what you do, just read them loud. When you read them out loud, at least your auditory area is able to pick, or your ear is able to pick what you are reading, and again process this information through the auditory means. So if you meet somebody with this condition, and maybe they're having a difficulty adapting with their studies, the only way that these people have is maybe to have some auditory way of delivering, or maybe if they have some physical, some visual words, they can read out loud. So when they read out loud, they are able to get the sense of what they are reading, unlike when you read in silent. And remember, this does not particularly suggest that you really need to have some disease process in this. You know that in different people, we might have different level of development when it comes to the angular gyrus. So we know watu wafanani. There's an individual that could be having a well-developed area, and maybe you could be an individual who is having an average development or slightly below the average. So you'll understand that for you to get these thoughts stored in form of information or in form of memory, you have to have a way of encoding this into your brain. If you're having a well-developed angular gyrus, you can just read silently and comprehend everything smoothly. But if your angular is not as good, what you need to do, you might need to back it up with an audio or maybe read out loud. So sometimes maybe you're reading out loud, you are able to compensate for that. And at the end of the day, people will still classify you as intelligent. So it's also, again, in terms of knowing that, well, the angular gyrus could be developed, but it might not be the same to with every individual. So take note of that. So just like the Wanike area, also when it comes to the angular gyrus, so just like with the Wanikes, we are also likely to have an area, they are likely to be more developed in one cerebral hemisphere than the other. For example, this hemisphere is called the dominant hemisphere. In about 95% of all people, the left hemisphere is more dominant than one. So it means that if you have a disease process that affects the dominant part of your hemisphere, or the stroke that affects one region of your brain, if it happens to target the left and you are right-handed, it means that you might have all this global effect, ranging from some motor deficit and some intellectual deficit. Because remember, you are intelligent. One of the intelligence, the domain of intelligence revolves around language. Because if the language is poor, it means that the only information you have, it is the only information that you remain with. You'll not be able to receive some particular or some other types of information. This is because we know that everything is changing, and if you want to remain intelligent, you should also be able to incorporate new informations that you are likely to get them in form of words. And remember, we have different form of words, the English words that we are able to see in syllables, and some other Chinese or some Arabic that is understandable or to some people. So we've been suggesting the Wernicke's areas as very important in encoding, decoding a language or decoding words. The person communicated, or the person who was communicating, was able to translate, the person who was communicating had some thoughts in their head, and they are able to decode or code these thoughts into words. So how do you code these thoughts into word? So this is normally by the Broca's area. So that means the Broca's area should be supplied by the Wernicke's. So placing here Wernicke's area, where Wernicke's area normally picks words. So remember, when you have words, words are just code of information. For example, something like an area. In your society, maybe an area means a space, but we can decide still within our society that an area from today will mean an head. So when you think of an area, when you hear the word area, it represents the thoughts of an head. So this is dependent on the society. So where the society decides, remember, sometimes it is not deliberate. Sometimes it is just by coincidence or just with some other factors. I know for us, we are in this generation where we've been able to see the development of some language. A good example is something like the Shembeteng. So the Shembetengs, that means we are having some words that were not there, but somehow the generation has somehow decided that let these words means something else. For example, when somebody says love, they are feeling it represents thoughts of love and feelings of love. So the Sheng people can say the Longotov, and it will be essentially the same thing. So you are saying the society is defining how we can be able to code these thoughts into word, where this will be different depending on the language. So whether you are a Kikuyu, a Luo, a Luya, or whichever Chinese, you have a way of coding. So this coding, when you have these words, that means you've coded your thoughts into words. Wanike, once in the Wanike area, Wanike is able to decode these words into thoughts again. And these thoughts can supply the broker's area. And what does the broker's area do? The broker area is able to code again these words. Maybe you are feeling pain, you are feeling love or anything. So your broker's area decide to say that I feel loved today. So that is a word that you are using. And this, remember, is dependent on the society. The society could be a Kikuyu society, could be a Shembeteng society. That will determine how you will be able to code your information. So if somebody does not understand your language, it doesn't mean that the Wanike areas is not functioning, but will affirm that you are not able to understand a particular language if you don't understand something that comes from your own society, from your own tribe. Not tribe by descent, but tribe by existence. So the opposite of the Wanike area is the brokers. So the broker, remember, it is a part of the premotor area, or sometimes the motor area, that control the movement of the specific area that should be able to produce the speech. So although the interpretative areas of the temporal lobes and the angular gyrus, as well as the many of the motor areas, are usually highly developed in only the left hemisphere, these areas receive sensory information from both hemisphere and are capable of controlling the motor activities in both hemisphere. And this is why we have the callosum or the corpus callosum, in that despite you having your Wernicke's area mostly dominant on the right, it doesn't mean that it is ignoring the signal from the left. That means the signals from the left will get through the specific area. A good example will be the visual area. We know that you can have the visual cortex of the right hemisphere, cerebral that is, and the visual cortex of the left cerebral hemisphere. So despite you not having the dominant area within the right part, these signals from the visual cortex of the right can pass through the corpus callosum and gets through the Wernicke's area of the left, and that's how it operates. And you'll be able to see some of the weird things that might happen if you're having your corpus callosum deceased or severed by way of trauma, or maybe scientifically separated, maybe not through human beings, but most probably through monkeys. You'll be able to see what it is anticipated. We cannot emphasize enough the role of the Wernicke's, and we are now suggesting that words plays an important role when it comes to intelligence. The domains of intelligence, remember, is memory. Memory is one of them, and not the only thing. and you'll not have a memory of anything, mostly in terms of words and experience, if you are not able to pick. So a good example is with our education system, where it is normally lecture based or maybe dependent on reading and everything that involves the words. It means that you need to incorporate, and after incorporating, you need to store these words or the concept that you got, and that is likely to happen if your NICS area or your language area is functioning. So, what is the role of language in the intellectual? A major share of our sensory experience is converted into language before being stored in the memory areas of the brain and before being processed for other intellectual purposes. A good example is, for example, when you read a book, you do not store the visual images of the printed words, but instead what you do, the words themselves are conveyed thoughts, often in a language form. So this is what normally happens, unless in some people where they normally talk of some photographic memory. Even if that is the case, before you work on these photographic memories, you'll need to again decode these words. So whereby some people can just glance on this page, like in this slide over here, and they are able to remember that at the left corner we had a brain. The first word was R, O, and everything just is suggesting a photographic memory. So even though that is possible, before you act on this memory and make sense of it, again, you'll still require the Wernicke's area, where you'll need to decode the dominant and understand what the dominant mean and make a sense out of it. So dominant is just a word, by example, that I'm just referring to. So what you need to know, like we suggested, words are like codes for encrypting information. And remember, this is dependent on the tribe and the society that you come from. And where your Wernicke area is like a decoder. The Wernicke area is able to decode this information that are stored in words. So they are able to break these words to discern or maybe to get a meaning out of it or to make a sense out of the words of information. And after getting this information, now at least the body or maybe the brain can utilize this information. So some of this information can be stored. Some of this information can be acted upon. A good example is maybe you are reading words or sentence that suggest you stand up. So maybe the words are stand up briefly. So after reading that, your Wernicke area will be able to make a thought out of it. And after making a thought out of it, the words can be stored, or some other important areas of your brain can act upon that word or can work upon that thought. Maybe the thought suggesting that you stand up. Your primary motor area and the various important area might be stimulated and you will end up standing. And all that is because of the language or the role of the Wernicke. So that's telling you the intelligence is also very important, especially in controlling some motor function, because we decided that when you're receiving some sensory information, not every sensory information is worth responding to, but the response needs to, whether to respond or not, you need to involve the intellect part of you. And that intellect part is with the thoughts. And where are some of the thoughts emanating from? Some thoughts can emanate from the words, that have been acted upon by the Wernicke's, and of course, thoughts that were stored in some very specific important areas, such as the hippocampus. So when the Wernicke's area is in the dominant area of the adult is destroyed, the person normally loses almost intellectual function associated with the language or verbal symbolism, such as the ability to read, the ability to perform mathematical operation, and the ability to think through logical problems. So these are some of the things that are likely to be depressed. So language is very important. Language is very important in the intellectual. So on top of the Wernicke, we also have another important associatory area, that is the parieto-occipitotemporal cortex. This is in the non-dominant hemisphere. So I want you to compare two hemispheres. So we are having the left and we are having the right. Remember, the Wernicke area is part and parcel of the parieto-occipitotemporal cortex, this area. So this is the Wernicke's area. So if this is the left, the dominant part, we can also have the Wernicke's area on this other area. So remember, we have two. This is the dominant, while this is the non-dominant. The non-dominant parieto-occipital cortex, or maybe you can say the non-dominant Wernicke's area. So this text is just about to explore what is the role of this other area of the Wernicke's that is not as active. So through some psychological studies in patients with damage to the non-dominant hemisphere, have suggested that this hemisphere may be especially important for understanding and interpreting music, non-verbal visual experience, especially visual patterns, spatial relations between the persons and their surrounding, the significance of body language, the intonation of people's voice, probably many somatic sensory experience related to the use of limbs and hand. So in as much as this is not very important when it comes to language, they are also serving some various roles. So these roles or these functions sometimes are normally referred to as other types of intelligence, where some people might say that, I know you are not intelligent, but show me your talent. So talent or these other roles that deviates from the standard intelligence can revolve around the non-dominant part. So that means if this area is diseased, you might have a deterioration in having these other types of intelligence. You might not be able to know the intonation in people's voice. And remember, we are not suggesting that this area is not important. This area is also very important. I'll not want to suggest this as other type of intelligence, but I'll want to categorize this as intelligence. A good example will be maybe somebody is just speaking. I can't think of the right statement at the moment, but we know that we can have one statement depending on how an individual is suggesting or is speaking out this statement, they are able to infer different meaning. So for example, you know that different intonation of a statement or of words are likely to have different meanings. So if somebody is asking a question, you should be able to know that this person is asking a question depending on how these people are varying their intonation as they are articulating some specific words. So that means despite you knowing, despite having a good Wernicke's area, sometimes your communication might be compromised if you are not able to understand the intonations, which are very important aspect of the the non-dominant part of the brain. So a good example could be in disease processes such as how do we call it? We have a disease by the name social pragmatic disorders. So if you have this disease, you are not able to read the mood of the individuals, maybe the mood of the class. You are not able to read. You are not able to read the mood of an individual or some facial expression. This is because you know that sometimes somebody can be telling you something, but if you read their facial expression, they could be meaning an opposite thing from what they are saying. So if you are having this social pragmatic disorder, you will just be consuming words literally. If somebody tells you they love you while they are laughing, you'll not be able to acknowledge the laughing part of it, knowing that these people are maybe probably ridiculing you. You'll just be able to believe that they love you because they said so. But if you are a person who is having a competent and dominant hemisphere working, you are able to see that despite these people saying that they love you, they were not serious because they were laughing. They were not serious because they were expressing a disgust in their face rather than a love appraisal face that you should be able to see. So that can also be a type of intelligence that is very good for social interaction and some expression of some physical abilities that might not be there in everybody. So lastly, with the intellectual part, we know that when you talk of the brain, as we were suggesting, the cerebral cortex, we are suggesting that these are very important for the higher intellectual function. So when you say the higher intellectual function, this requires individuals to be very conscious and to be very decisive, based on logic. This is to suggest that you could also be intelligent, but most of your intelligence, are based on emotions. So with emotions, you are not really able to outline why you acted on a specific way. This is because the appropriate word will be more of instincts. So you can act on instincts and you can act on logic. So when you are acting on logic, we normally refer that to as an higher intellectual function. And as human beings, where we have a well-developed cortex, it is likely to perform that particular role. So the specific part of the cortex that you are referring to, the cerebral, it is normally the prefrontal cortex. So comparing something like a monkey with some other monkey and human beings, where they do not have the much of the forehead, so they are likely to have some form of depression over here. While human beings, you can have something protruding like this, of course, not in a diseased way or in an exaggerated way. So this bank over here, we expect it to have some the prefrontal cortex. So it is normally charged with the higher intellectual functions. So the higher intellectual functions are likely to employ logic. You are likely to think through logic rather than instincts. So even though that is what you are suggesting, there is no much evidence to affirm that. So much of the existing evidence that is available, it is normally based upon what happens if an individual does not have this prefrontal cortex, or what happens when a prefrontal cortex is injured. So sometimes it can be injured deliberately in some scientific lab. So this normally happens to monkeys or animals. So we are hoping that these forms of study are not involving human beings, even though with the human beings, I know we'll be having a much conclusive evidence, but it is not recommended. So much of the hypothesis comes from the fact that humans have a more prominent and developed prefrontal cortex compared to other primates. So our thoughts, our decisions are likely to be based on logic, comparing us with maybe other primates. So because of this, having that, we know that humans have a well-developed prefrontal cortex, we are likely to say that much of our difference in terms of intellectual thinking is possibly because we have the prefrontal cortex. And because our thoughts are more logical than the primates whose thoughts are more instinctive, it is likely that that particular role is served by the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal areas do, however, less definable but nevertheless important intellectual function on their own. So this function can be best explained by describing what will happen to a patient if their prefrontal cortex area becomes damaged. And this is what is likely to happen. Several decades ago, before the advent of psychiatry, patients who suffered from severe psychotic depression were treated with a procedure called the prefrontal lobotomy. So it is good that maybe we are not in that generation, in that period. This is because the treatment that we will have gotten is by somebody inserting a nail through our forehead. And remember the role, what this physician is intending to achieve is they are intending to kill some thoughts. Because we are intellectual beings who normally base our thoughts on logic. And remember, when you are talking of logic, the logic sometimes does not need to be factual, or it doesn't need to be true. When you are talking of logic, we are just referring to specific pattern of thoughts with some evidence that might not be necessarily true. A good example will be individuals who are debating. So somebody debating and telling you this color is white with some thought processes that you are able to trace through. Another individual debating and suggesting that the color that you are seeing is black and not white. So these people, both of these people, after arguing out their points, they might express some logic. So logic does not mean, when you are using logic, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily telling the truth, but at least it is a pattern of thoughts. So this procedure under here, its main aim were to kill thoughts, to kill the logic, the planning part. So remember, one of the severest, maybe one of the symptoms of the severe psychotic depression could be some thoughts that could be diminishing maybe yourself, thinking of yourself maybe as a worthless guy. And while you're thinking of yourself as a worthless guy, there are some things within your environment that can actually prove that you think you are worthless because maybe physically you think you are ugly, and your eyes through mirror can be able to see that. You think you are worthless because you lost a debate. You think you are worthless because of so many stuff. These are the thoughts that are ongoing within your brain. So this physician, upon inserting a nail or maybe an instrument within that area, they were able to destroy the prefrontal cortex. And guess what happened? In the process, they were also able to kill these thoughts that were contributing to much of the depression. So this was the kind of treatment. And it is through these techniques that at least we were able to appreciate some of the specific mental role that were normally seen. Even though the physician or the psychiatrist were aiming to kill these thoughts which were thought to be negative because these people are experiencing depression. These were some of the other physical things that were noted, suggesting that their prefrontal cortex were now injured and now they were lacking in this. So subsequent studies in this patient showed some of the following mental changes. So it was seen that this patient lost the ability to solve some complex problem, suggesting that the prefrontal cortex it's normally good in solving some problem. They become unable to string together sequential tasks to reach some complex goal. So that is the logic pattern. They became unable to learn to do several parallel tasks at the same time. And remember, that is essential, as we'll be able to see. Their level of aggressiveness were decreased, sometimes markedly, and in general, they lost their ambition. So they were just there. But at least it is better for you to lose your ambition rather than having a compelling thoughts of killing yourself. So we spare you from suicide, but at least a side effect of becoming socially, some people might term it useless. But at least if your thinking process is not there, the loss of ambition will not bother you. Their social response were often inappropriate for the occasion, often include loss of moral and little reticence in relation to sexual activity and excretion. So we'll be able to see some of the disease, possibly in the hypothalamus, the Kluver-Bucy syndrome that could be having the same sorts. Because remember, the prefrontal area, because it is good to serve you with some logic patterns of thoughts. If it is not there, it means that you'll not be able to control yourself. So scientifically, we can suggest that you are disinhibited. So that means everything just comes with excitation. You are having some sexual urge, you can just, rather than maybe postponing your sexual urge to find an appropriate place, you might start to do inappropriate things publicly. Sexual urge is just one of them. There are some many things that these people might have, but the good thing is that the apathy that these people are likely to have. So the apathy sometimes might prevent them from doing that. Not because that they have decided not to do it. This is because they are too tired to even do what they want to do. So another symptom, the patient could still talk and comprehend language, but they are able to carry out the thoughts. So remember, there were nickers. After you've been able to take the words, they are normally decoded into thoughts. So these thoughts are expected to be acted upon by the prefrontal cortex. So if the prefrontal cortex is not there, you might not be able to act upon them appropriately. So these people are not able to have long trains of thoughts, and their moods change rapidly from sweetness to rage, to exhilaration, or to madness. So they are not able to contain their mood. So they are likely just to shift, just like what might happen with some kids. The patient could also still perform most of the usual patterns of motor function that they perform throughout their life, but without any purpose. So another function that has been ascribed to the prefrontal cortex is the elaboration of the thoughts. So this is mostly important when you are reading something. What you are reading should just be able to trigger your thoughts. Your words have been converted into thoughts. But if you find yourself not able to think beyond what you are reading, think beyond what you are seeing, think beyond what you are hearing. Like, for example, my anticipation for us, assuming that we are all normal, with what we are registering or with what we are hearing and what we are seeing, we are able to incorporate them into thoughts. So the story should not just end at thought level. So we should be able to utilize these thoughts to evoke or maybe to form even much deeper thoughts. So that's an error of the pen giving us the love. So we should just be able to we should just be able to utilize these thoughts and to explore on these thoughts to generate some other thoughts. So maybe triggering some other aspect of our memories and maybe triggering our logical pattern. It is just a good example could be something like, what is 1 plus 1? So 1 plus 1, you're able to think of the 1 and another 1. So these are thoughts, and you're able to use these thoughts in an intelligent way to come up with an answer too. And you can even go further and try to think of maybe two. It is not only a number that you are referring to. Maybe these two could be representing, you start to think of maybe some eggs, dealing with 2 eggs. Sometimes it might not end at 2. You might think of what happens if I add another egg. So it could be probably 3, and so on. So you'll be having a continuation of thoughts, or you are elaborating on the thoughts. So you had an initial trigger as per what was written, 1 plus 1, you know it is 2. It can end at that point if your prefrontal area it is not as good. But if it's good, you might want to think through these two. What does these two really means? And this, some people say that you might, while employing this way of thinking, some might say that now you are employing the imagination aspect, thinking beyond what is presented. It is a way of elaboration of the thoughts. So this means simply an increase in depth and abstractness of the different thoughts put together from multiple sources of information. One of the results is that people without the prefrontal cortex are easily distracted from the central theme of the thoughts, whereas people with functioning prefrontal cortex can drive themselves to completion of the thoughts uh, uh, to a certain goal, irrespective of the distraction. And this is very important, as we'll be able to see by some specific neurotransmitters that should be aiding this. So if you are speaking in terms of numbers, I'm anticipating that your thoughts should be revolving around numbers or anything related with these numbers until a point maybe where you want. But if this area is not developed, it means that you can be easily distracted. And again, to suggest we don't have the same, we have different level of development amongst normal individuals. We can see there are some people who are able to concentrate and reach their final goal that they thought intended, but some people are likely to be distracted despite them being normal. So with this information, you should just be able to know how you should be able to manipulate that. So this ability of the prefrontal areas to keep track of many bits of information simultaneously is what is normally referred to as the working memory. So remember, the working memory is very important. Means that, just an example. So let's say you are having some sensation from the peripheral area. It gets this sensation, to be specific, they are in terms of words. That could be visions, that could be in visual or in auditory form. The Wernicke does what it does best in terms of decoding these informations into thoughts. So now they are into thoughts. And remember, while in thoughts, we've suggested that it is good to elaborate on these thoughts, or you can work on these thoughts. So maybe it was an instruction that was telling somebody maybe to stand up. So these thoughts can be stored temporarily within the prefrontal cortex. So maybe telling you to stand up. And before you act on this thought, there need to be some form of comparison. So maybe you are getting some other impulses that telling you some other visual aspect whereby you cannot stand up because maybe your environment, you are in a risky environment. Maybe if you stand up, something will happen. Maybe there's a barrier. If you stand up, there'll be some form of limitation. So these are some of the sensation or some thoughts that you are also having. So these thoughts representing this telling you to stand up. Another thought telling you that you've been able to see using your eyes and you are able to see that maybe you cannot stand up because the height, there's some form of limitation in the height. If you stand up, maybe your head will be hurt because this area is not limiting. Or maybe you are in a risky area. If you stand up amongst this group, amongst these individuals, you'll be noted, and maybe you are a shy person. You don't want to be noted because if you are noted, maybe the presenter will pick on you to give a contribution. So there's an instruction, can you stand up? And there's an information getting through your prefrontal cortex about the height. Maybe the height is not allowing, or maybe you are shy because of your emotional state. You don't want to speak in front of people. So all this can be stored within the working memory. And in the working memory, at least it will give your brain some time to decide on which thought to execute. Maybe for convenient purpose, you'll end up not standing because emotionally or through your psychic, you are not able to withstand talking in front of people. So at the end of the day, this thought will be much stronger with some of this emotional aspect, and maybe you might end up not obeying this. So this is to suggest that the working memory is very important because they are able to store information temporarily just before you act. And what are these information? So this information could be conflicting information, or could be information that are appraising each other, so that by the time you are acting based on these various information. Because when somebody telling you to stand up, and maybe you are in a place where the height is limiting, and maybe you have the at the hippocampus level, you are having a stored memory, maybe telling you, reminding you of a day where maybe you attempted to stand and maybe your head was hurt. So this information will also be taken from the hippocampus and maybe placed into the working area. So by the time you are acting out this standing up, you'll be able to acknowledge that I remember what happened last time. I stood up, but whatever happened was not pleasing. So therefore, I'll not be able to stand. And you are able to make a decision. So where are you making your decision from? You are able to make a decision from this information. These informations over here. These informations are stored in the working memory, or they can be referred to as the working memory. One of the most important area that normally serves that role is the prefrontal cortex. So studies have shown that the prefrontal areas are divided into separate segments for storing different types of temporary memory, such as one area for storing the memory in regard to shape, forming an object or part of the body, or another for storing the movement. So by combining all these type of temporary bits of the working memories, we have the ability to prognosticate. So that is to at least tell the prognosis or tell the future. You can also plan for the future. You can delay and response to an incoming sensory signal, and we've been able to demonstrate. You won't be able to act out the way somebody's suggesting, because you are using the working memories to also examine information from your past experience. And again, you are able to consider the consequences of what will happen, because you are able to project that if you stand up, maybe you'll hurt your head. This is what you are able to predict. And again, this enables you to solve complicated mathematical, legal, and philosophical problems. For example, if somebody says, what is 1 plus 1? Before you act on this, you need to put this into your working memory. One of the working memory information that will be very vital is you'll need to know at the hippocampus, or at where you are storing your memory, you have where plus is stored. So you know what plus means. So this needs to be reverted back to the working memory so that you know what plans means. And now you are able to reutilize this to be able to form some complex problem that is coming. The incoming sensory signals were suggesting 1 plus 1, but 1 plus 1, well, you know 1 plus 1, what it means. You are able to get from your memory what does plus mean. So plus means adding. Okay, now you'll be able to add 1 plus 1 and get 2. But if you are not able to retrieve plus, and maybe you are confusing it for multiplication, you might end up giving us an answer as 1, because you don't have an information for this plus. What does this plus really means? And what it means, you are able to get it from your memory. And before you act on it to tell us an answer, this need to be acted upon the working memory. So in a computer, this can be equated to RAM, where this can be equated to the ROM, where you are just storing things in the memory, but you'll only use it when required. And when required, it depends on the RAM or on the working memory. So the working memory capacity also need to be big. If your working memory capacity is big, it means that you can work on many things at the same time. And if you've interacted with those people who are smart, maybe mathematically, where they are asked maybe something like 9, 2, 9, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, multiplied by the same number or the square of this, and they are able to tell you the answer instantly. This is because they have a big working memory, in that they are able to compare many things at the same time to be able to give you an answer. So just like in some computer, if you're having a RAM of 2 GB and somebody having a RAM of 32, you cannot compare what this computer can do compared to the 2. So the 2 GB might be much slower, while the 32 GB might be much faster. And it's the same concept when it comes to the working memory.